I've got a few slides to help tell a story, and that's what I intend to do today. So I'll kind of start off with a little bit about me, but not very much about me. So Eric Satterley, I'm at Bellarmine University, the CIO. You can see I put a lot of effort into grabbing stuff off LinkedIn, so you can go read more if you want to know what these different titles mean or do. But I think the most important thing, I feel like I'm a self-appointed Teams evangelist, and that is what makes this useful for our talk today. So in structuring this, I called this thing Microsoft 365 and Bellarmine versus the pandemic. So that gave me a chance as I was reflecting on like what things could I tell people that would be useful or enjoyable and worth your time here and tied into Microsoft. So I went back on a little bit of a trip down memory lane to help bring everything together. And this is kind of when I think about the pandemic and the impact on us, these were some of like the big points for Bellarmine and I know society at large, but we got an email from our president on March 13th just saying, hey, this situation's becoming a thing. Hey, starting on Monday, how about you just work from home, whatever that means, right? And you can see the timeline of different things we did on class. And I think it's really interesting. March 12th, we suspended on-campus classes, basically trying to figure out what are we going to do with the plan of Wednesday, March 18th, we're going to resume everything temporarily online. Just let's just do that. And then the plan will be April 1st. This will all be over and we'll be back together. So that's interesting to reflect back on that. When I think of where we were with Teams back in March 17th timeframe, this is a not super scientific histogram here. It's just everything's kind of blocked out. But the end of 2017, the end of 2018, 2019, and then actually March of 2020. But the point that I'm making is we had a few teams in 2017. We were up to maybe 85 by the end of 2019 or 2018. By the end of 2019, pushing 250. And then mid-March of 2020, we were a little above 400. We'd started to, get some juice on getting people using Teams for some more academic purposes. And then March 17th, we jumped that to 996. So in a matter of just a few days, we over doubled our Teams capacity, and we were kind of off and running at that point. And then I think about where we are today. So a year later, I can kind of show you a little bit better picture. We're now sitting at 4,505 teams at Bellarmine. So this is based on an accurate time scale and kind of shows you our growth. I tried to do a little bit of a 3D histogram to give it some context and make it look better than a couple of lines that would just get lost. But we've obviously rapidly accelerated that. So Teams continues to be a really strong platform for us. But I spent years, a lot of us in IT spent years just trying to beg and get people over there, and adoption was hard, and then it was easy. So this is just another representation of our Teams usage, and just kind of shows how it went. It's one thing to have the Teams, it's another thing to be using them. So the top graph really indicates how many, it's essentially the logins that we were having into Teams, and you can see how the ramp up was kind of our period of time working with our community to help them understand how to use it. And then, March 18th, that was the first day of classes. So the biggest peak, boom, that was remote classes. Everything was happening in Teams. So the top chart is some of our internal systems that are pulling access information. And then the bottom is probably what you're familiar with if you use the Microsoft tools, more of the Microsoft representation in their Teams admin console. So you can see that, that corroborates our findings. Usage certainly increased. And then when I show you that over a scale of, what did it look like in January to what did it look like in April, you can see that our usage, shot up and then sustained. And if I take you into today, this is what it looks like for us today. So we're still continuing to see the cycles that we would hope to see. Teams is being used every week. You can see our weekends. You can see the holiday break at the end of the year. Nobody was too interested, but yeah, we've continued to see and maintain those patterns. So usage ramped up and his stayed high. And I won't really spend a lot more time kind of belaboring that, but I will reference this, and I'll have this link at the end too if you want it. But one of the things that was fun that we did early on was started kind of like a podcast or video cast series called the Bellarmine Underground, Tales from the Quarantine. And our head of innovative learning systems did this and started to interview lots of different kind of, key people across the university that were working with this digital transformation. And, we did a couple of like hour-long video segments and just talked about the pandemic and its impact. So if you want to see some more graphs, you want to hear some more details, and you want to learn about, kind of that nuts and bolts, please check it out. And there's more than just me. You can see an interview with me, but several other people. So kind of continuing on that theme, I'm a member of a CIO listserv that's focused on education, specifically higher education. And there were lots of opinions and things kind of flying around. And it's always fun to go back and look at maybe predictions that you made. So I know this is hard to read, but this was an email that I posted into that at the end of March. And I found it again, rummaging through my artifacts. And I thought the interesting note that I'd kind of made in here and sort of my thoughts on this were that we were seeing our different offices engaging with us, trying to automate things like we never have before. We'd really been encouraging automation or encouraging moves to new tools, but with the pandemic, not only were we shifting, to a remote footing and trying to do everything digitally, but now people wanted to automate processes that were manual. Obviously, we weren't going to be in our office touching the paper. So, it was kind of this time where it was like, wow, there's a lot of richness and capability for us to seize upon. And what's interesting when I think about that, and I think about all the decisions that were being made, all of that happened before the arrow. So we were at that point where the yellow arrow is. We're thinking, okay, where are we in this pandemic? How do we start to think about returning to work? What's the summer going to look like at Bellarmine? What are we going to do about the fall? I mean, the thought of still doing this a year later, I don't think was on anybody's horizon. But in reality, like, this is what we had in front of us. So there were a lot of decisions being made, a lot of, how do we return to work? How do we return to campus? How do we return to teaching? So all that, kind of setting the table in my mind for what May started to look like for us. And so as I looked back in our kind of history of how we started to use tools and needed to leverage things quickly to handle how we deal with protecting our community and returning to some degree of normalcy through the pandemic, I found that in May 15th was really like the time when we built our first form to address the pandemic on a kind of a safety and, being around campus standpoint. So here's this little form that we threw up, the COVID-19 health screening form, done in Microsoft Forms. And there's an email just to kind of, commemorate the date that this sort of went out. But it was a simple form, what we were encouraged to do by the CDC and the state, and the symptom checker. Hey, here are the symptoms. What's your temperature? And let's submit this data to a form. And that sounds not bad and easy to do, right? Everybody can spin up a form and do this. But when we spun up that form, it caused a lot of problems, or presented challenges. Maybe problems is too much, but we started to then have to answer questions like, well, so we've got a form. Who needs access to the data that we're collecting in the form? And then if we collect this data, what responsibility do we have based on the data, based on responses? Do we need alerts? If we need alerts, who gets them? Should they get them 24/7? And what if we need to change, some of the info that we're collecting? The CDC issues new guidance. We have to ask new questions. Who's in charge of that? I mean, we were just, quite frankly, making this up as we went along. Nobody had the answers. We were asking a lot of questions, and it was really hard. And, go back again a year ago, mass confusion. Definitely, we still have fear today, but it was a much, much less knowing of the future fear. So we came up with this thing at Bellarmine we called the Rapid Response Team. And it was a team that we commissioned that was led by our Dean of Students. And it had the mission of dealing with COVID-19 issues in real time. So, I mean, honestly, just creating this team was a huge innovation for us. This team met, and we still meet, just not quite as frequently, but we met for about 90 minutes every day to collaboratively manage COVID-19 for Bellarmine. So it consisted of people from health services, res life, human resources, marketing, communication, student affairs, our president's office, and then of course IT. And so this team had to handle intake of COVID-19 cases. It had to develop policy and programs for surveillance testing, gateway testing, community testing. We had to create quarantine and isolation capacity on our campus. Obviously, we house students. We had to perform contact tracing and deal with notifications. We had to handle care checks for community members that were in isolation, facilitate collection of screening data from our athletes, which is a little bit different requirement than the general community, communicate with our community members, and then other duties as assigned. So I took the approach in this to say that there's too many questions. We don't even know what we're doing. We have to have things spun up very quickly. So I just decided that this wasn't going to be a typical project. We weren't going to be able to develop specs and, send it through our normal process. This had to be kind of hyper agile. And we needed to just spin up minimum viable products as quickly as we could and then improve them if and when we had capacity. So I kind of embedded myself on this rapid response team. And while I went to those meetings and they were all remote, I spent a lot of the time in those meetings, especially initially listening to what we were trying to do and saying, there's an app for that, right? There's a Office 365 tool that we could bring to bear. And a lot of times I was creating tools that we needed like during the meeting. So we start the meeting and it's like, I need something that does blah, blah, blah. And maybe by the end, I'm like, here it is. So give this a try. And so we were just iterating through, and it was, difficult, but I'll not lie, sometimes invigorating as well. So this isn't an awesome representation because it's obviously clipped off, but this is just our publicly accessible COVID-19 dashboard. And of course, everybody has a dashboard. And so this is kind of the best screenshot I could grab shortly from the public site. But this just kind of shows the gray is what we call recovered cases. So people that don't have any active infection. And the point that I'm making with this is just to show that we had cases on our campus, or not necessarily on campus, but community members. And, they were all tracked and shown on our dashboards. And the point is that we had to deal with COVID at Bellarmine, as everybody did. And this next slide is really interesting. Our Dean of Students put this together, and I know it's hard to read, and I don't expect you to, but the point is he wanted to really map out, like, what is the impact of a single COVID-19 case at Bellarmine? And one of the critical things that we sussed out of this is that there are 18 critical pieces of data that go along with every case that we have. And so this is all kinds of things based on like the date of a test that you had, the date of test results, the date of contact, if you were exposed, when you're eligible for testing, when a quarantine period starts, when a quarantine period stops, things like that. So that we're able to understand what resources to align. Also, if you were in isolation or quarantine on campus, how we're tracking that, how we're making sure that you're able to be fed, that rooms are clean. So just a whole lot of information that accompanied each case. And so at the end of all of that, this one will make your head hurt too. But this is just like a fairly high-level map of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem that was developed to support the previous slide and all those things. And so, it was a lot of things. And what I wanted to do is, just kind of show you a few of these as we go through. And so, the first point I'll make is you saw that it's a whole bunch of stuff. And I just would, just throw out the thing that we, of course, organized to work with Planner, but that it was a lot of things that we went through. And we're talking May of 2020 until now. There's still active things that I'm doing and, more that I dream and want to do. So when I kind of pitched to Jeremy that this would be a cool talk to do, my intent fully in my mind was that, all right, we're done with PowerPoint and I'm going to drive you straight into our Office 365 and we're just going to jump around. And, and then it occurred to me that I wanted to do it live, but yeah, I can't do it live because that's just chock full of stuff that you all can't see. So we won't be doing that, but I want to make this useful and show you like really good things. And so I think I can make that happen. And so the plan for the rest of this is I'm going to hit on a couple of areas in this ecosystem, and I'm going to dive in and show you just a couple of cool angles. And hopefully maybe that'll inspire you to say, I could do something like this, or, you're certainly welcome to reach back out to me later and say, there was a way easier way than what you did, because that's, I think, what makes us all better. So I'm going to show you this diagram. It's kind of the big ecosystem here. I'll put a star on the area that we're going to drill into, and then I'm going to drill into with some kind of redacted screenshots of different things and talk through them. So at the core of all of this is what I'm calling the COVID-19 kind of case management system. And it is a SharePoint site, and it has a series of critical lists on that site. And those lists are, that's where the magic happens. And so let's look at the first one. This is the core case management tool. So again, just a SharePoint site. My main entry page, the landing page into that site, is a series of links that, I have made to look like really nice buttons. Some will take you to things on this site. Some will take you to different sites. There's kind of 4 sites that sort of participate as the core ecosystem. And I do that for security reasons predominantly, but then use different wedges to maybe move data if we need to behind the scenes. And then if you were to click the case management button, that is going to bring you to the case management list, kind of our master list in case management. And so in this list, we're categorizing a wide range of data points. We're capturing if somebody does indeed have a positive test result, if they've been exposed and we need to kind of monitor a quarantine period that they're on, or they didn't even know that they had an exposure. We've had to reach out and put them on quarantine. So we're able to track all of that in here. I think everybody got pretty good at being data practitioners inside of SharePoint, but I think we probably all feel good about doing this type of stuff with SharePoint. But I'm going to share one simple innovation that I think can be life-changing for people that use this tool. And it's so simple. It's basically the edit form for any of the elements that you would have in your SharePoint list. And if you build a SharePoint list and you go to edit an item, to pull out the little window from the right side, and you'll have every one of your elements just kind of laid out there linearly. But it's really easy to go in. You can add just a little bit of JSON and manipulate what the data element order and groupings are in the screen that's presented. So I'm just showing kind of what the code looks like that helps you rearrange things. And honestly, that's huge. Just the ability to help tell a story helped my community members that were engaged in this tool so much, knowing which section to go to, which data elements. So it was just easier than having this huge list that was kind of chunky and then expecting them to be able to pivot through that list. And so this seems simple, but really big. I mean, this was one where, you get somebody will take you to lunch when you give them something like this. And then the other thing that I think is really cool and powerful is we had started to train our rapid response team to work collaboratively inside of teams. And it's nice to have SharePoint that they can go to and do these things. But if you can shove your SharePoint inside of Teams, right? And so here is, a shot of our teams. We had the COVID-19 health screening management team, and in it, we had a channel called Case Management. And in that case management channel, I built a tab, which is basically just pulling in that list from SharePoint. So you can see from the last screen we were on, you see, if I, just jump back to this area where it's showing my case management list versus what I have inside of Teams is the exact same, right? And so now my rapid response team members were able just to live in Teams and do this work, right? And so I mean, you all know this probably from being there, but I mean, Teams is SharePoint and SharePoint is Teams. And so this even ended up kind of being a joke for us. By the end of it, I had this like so ingrained in everybody that we were just, going through our Mandalorian creed with this. So this is the way, right? So simple, but really powerful. And then let's jump to something maybe a little more detailed and exciting. So I'm going to pivot back to our health screening form. And so this again is that form that we had looked at early on, and it collects this information. But we had a lot of challenges, like what do we do with this information when we collect it? And I agree, Microsoft Forms is a really nice place to do it. But now what do I go do? Do I go just keep dumping an Excel spreadsheet every time I want to access that data? And what if I need to do something in real time? And so we decided that we had goals of, we certainly wanted to collect and house this data, but we also wanted to alert key personnel if something was out of tolerance. Like if somebody came on our campus and said, my temperature is 104, we wanted somebody to know that right away. And we also wanted to let the people submitting the form have some degree of assurance that it was okay for them to come on campus if they passed the screening. And so Forms is nice for the collection piece, and it certainly makes it easy to stand up the fields that you want to collect. But then what do you do with that, right? And so that was like my job. Okay, now go solve that problem. And we solved the problem through PowerAutomate. So formerly Flow, you may know PowerAutomate as the artist formerly known as Flow. And we still, certainly me, I get them mixed up all the time. I continue to say Flow, but Flow to the rescue, PowerAutomate to the rescue. So I had maybe used PowerAutomate for a few things here and there along the way, but I got very involved with it, doing this project. And so let's look at what that PowerAutomate looks like for the health screening form. So if we were doing this live, and I guess this part, as I think through, I could have absolutely done live, but PowerAutomate is a tool inside of the Microsoft 365 suite that lets you build automation. And certainly there are other tools, we could look at Power Apps being something a little more vigorous, but PowerAutomate is kind of a workflow automation tool. And so you're able to bring in different triggers. You're able to bring in different elements of data. You're able to create variables. You're able to manipulate time. And you're able to put in conditional logic to make decisions and do things. And so what I'm showing you here is on the left is just a series of the different major blocks of this PowerAutomate that was referenced and tied to this health screening form. So the health screening form was set that every time it was submitted, it would trigger a PowerAutomate to kick off. In this case, this PowerAutomate. And it would basically, the logic was in here to look at a lot of things. And one of the third item down, it actually goes into Office 365 to pull back the submitter's user object, right? So I know because they're in my Microsoft 365 ecosystem who submitted my form. That's a control that I set on the form. And I can now take that knowledge and I can go and get much more verbose information about them through my Microsoft instance. So I'm able to know a lot about them. I'm able to get their name, their status within my community, email, obviously lots of those things that are going to come in really handy because I want to know if they're an employee. I want to know if they're a student. We have different teams that provide the care depending. So this flow comes back, looks at the answers that were submitted, makes some decisions based on what tolerance is, are you within tolerance, out of tolerance, and will then go and update one of two SharePoint lists to put new data in to say, hey, I've got an alert that somebody needs to take a look at. That list has been structured such that, there's options that somebody can set, in process working on, resolved, so kind of who's doing the work. But at the end of it, this flow will come back and it will send an email back to the person that submitted to say, okay, hey, based on the answers that you've submitted, you have a campus pass for this day. and it personalizes it a little bit to, show their name and the body of the email to make it a little bit nicer, and some nice green coloring to feel like, you're good and you got the pass. So yeah, it's a really handy way. Nobody had to touch that. If nothing is out of tolerance, the campus pass flows straight back to the person and they have it. We never did anything like requiring people to present passes, but it was more intended to be, hey, here is your pass, and you can kind of feel good that you did meet the criteria to be here. On the other end, if you didn't meet the criteria, you would get an email that would come back to say, hey, based on what you've submitted, please don't come to campus today. Talk to your supervisor. If you're an employee, talk to your healthcare provider, and offered a little bit of guidance, but just ways really to kind of help and raise awareness on that front. So this was a flow, a PowerAutomate that definitely is a high volume one for us. We're going to see a lot of those people coming to campus. And I will tangentially just mention, we also have one for visitors. So I may not know or have a Microsoft object for you, but I still need a way for visitors to do it. I've got to ask them a few more detailed questions, like who your campus contact is, to try to help route that in the same way. But we do collect information on visitors as well. But if you don't use PowerAutomate a bunch, I mean, it's fantastic from the standpoint of if you want to go into the instrumentation and see if it's being used, if it's failing. I would say in all the time that I've been really like living this and kind of micromanaging these different PowerAutomates, there was about a 4-hour period one afternoon in the fall where I guess the PowerAutomate infrastructure was having trouble at Microsoft, and I got several emails and phone calls that the screening form was not providing campus passes back to people. And sure enough, when I looked in the tools here, I could see that it was indeed having failures, and then was able to attribute that to a much more widespread problem than just something that was happening in our instance. So you do have the ability to see things, but otherwise, knock wood, this has been rock solid. And I can see patterns in here, really kind of drilling into the logs and effectiveness of this. And so it's useful to be able to tell how your different infrastructure pieces are doing. One thing that I don't have a screenshot for that would be really cool if you haven't seen it is in the lower left on that 28-day run history. You can drill into that run history. So I could actually go in and I could see, essentially rehydrate that one PowerAutomate, and I could see all of the data elements at each checkpoint. So if I want to do troubleshooting, I mean, it's fantastic. So I could go back in and see, if somebody says, I never got my form, I could actually find them in the PowerAutomate and see that, yep, sure enough, you did indeed get your form, and so the problem is somewhere else. I guess the other note that I would make, just I'm going to hop back on the screen for just a second and just say, we did make use of shared mailbox. So one of the hardest working mailboxes we have on campus is the BU bot, and a lot of emails come to people from the BU bot. And so I'm able to send from that shared mailbox so that it doesn't have, every one of these emails coming from Eric Satterley, because that would be annoying for all of us. All right, so that is health screening forms and PowerAutomate. I'm going to take you back to our main ecosystem and kind of the map. I'm going to take you now down to this care check area, and this is something that I'm really excited about. And so let's talk about this a little bit. So one of the things that we really want to do at our university is care about our community. I mean, if we're being very candid about this, being put on quarantine at any time is hard. And if we remember where we were in the pandemic back in the fall, it was like, if you're a contact, the CDC says quarantine periods are 14 days, period. And that's a tough one. It's a tough one to enforce. It's a tough one. I mean, we had a lot of people that were really, really down. You're a contact and now you're on quarantine. And so, I mean, just people would, just battling with being really upset and sad about this. And so we really wanted to extend care and compassion and really make sure that our community members were okay in this. Now the rules on quarantine are different. And if you've been exposed, but you on the 5th day post-exposure are asymptomatic and can have a negative test, you can come out on the 7th day. Well, if you looked back at our data, just that change, dropping 7 days of quarantine for people, that was massive for us. The number of days that we had on quarantine and then the quality of experience that we can give back to the people releasing from quarantine was pretty critical. So, adapting the tools to then take in that change in scope and kind of policy was big. But we needed a way to check in with our community members. We needed a way to track that we were doing it and kind of manage all that. And so again, what do we do and how do we solve that problem? And so for us, it was kind of teams to the rescue again. The initial thought, the initial desire was to build a call center, like a contact center, set up a bunch of phones, and we would make phone calls to all the community members that were under quarantine or isolation. But, that's a lot of infrastructure to spin up. That's a lot with our phone system to find phones that maybe we didn't have. And so the idea came up that's like, let's use Teams. Why can't we use Teams? And so we repurposed a classroom as our care center. We put 10 laptops in there. We got every person that was going to work in the care center their own keyboard, mouse, and headphones. And that's just, stick it in your bag and bring it with you. And we actually staffed our care center with a lot of nursing students who were on clinical rotations for psychology. So it was great. They had a clinical instructor that could help them, understand the process of talking to somebody that would be on quarantine isolation and support that. And then we'd bring them in different cohorts at different times, spread out. We would never have really 10 at any one time. And then to pair with this infrastructure that we built of these laptops in a room, we built a care check team. And in that care check team, we actually built out 10 channels. And the idea was that each channel was associated with each one of those laptops in the room. So if I went in and I was assigned working with, care check machine 1, so CCO1, then my work would be done in that channel. One of the things that I think I know a lot about Teams and really kind of push and advocate for things, but the person that was kind of running this center went in, and whenever they would bring in the staff that were going to work that particular shift, they would go in and rename the channel like CCO1 dash and then the name of the staff member that was working it. And then the next shift that would come in, they would change the name to the new staff member. And at first I was like, but you can't just change the name of the channels. But in fact, it was brilliant because there was just no confusion. It really helped everybody understand who was on which machine and making which set of calls just by looking at the channel list and Teams. So it's one of those things. It's not the way I saw it going, but it went that way, and it was great. And so anyway, we had these 10 channels, and what we would do is set appointments with our community members ahead of time in the channel, and there would be a meeting in the channel. So, if it was one of our nursing students would get in the channel and connect with somebody to just do a check-in with them. We built a form, and when I say we, our health services, certainly not something I was capable of doing, and it was pretty involved. Had a lot of branching logic that helped if somebody was really needing additional help or resources. It could take you to a series of questions to make sure we could deliver that care. But we put that form inside of all of our channels so that when you were in the channel working, you could just quickly pivot to the form. You could complete the form while you're in your Teams, you're in your channel, and then you're conducting your meeting back in that channel. So I'm in a meeting, we're together, the supervisor for that shift would be able to hop into the channel and they could join the meeting if there was additional coaching needing or additional support. So it was fantastic, and then afterwards they could have kind of a retrospective of what could we do better on a call? How could we help out more? So, really, I think just shows how incredibly flexible and useful Teams is. We spun that up in an afternoon, if even that long. You know, the toughest part was just getting the machine set up in a room, but you know, we built the team within 5 minutes. And as we started to kind of explore, well, oh, we can document things if we need to in here, or you know, here's a great way to just, you know, at somebody and ask for help while you're in a team. And we built that as a separate team, and we didn't put it in kind of the massive case management system, because the idea was this wasn't going to be a place where we collected and stored any data. But we were able to take information that we collected from the form and then use PowerAutomate to move that along on the back end. So I just, you know, to me, this was a very clever pivot with teams in a way that, you know, spinning up a traditional call center would have taken a lot more resources. And just to make the point, you know, the net new cost for us to do this, and honestly, anything that we've talked about today has been $0. I mean, we didn't spend anything other than effort. So if I bring you back to the big ecosystem, and you know, there's just so much within here, and you know, we could spend just tons of time going through all of this, but I want to hit a lot of the big things that sort of show the different ways that we can exercise the system and do some clever things. So let's talk about positive case notification, because I think this is another really nice and kind of clever innovation. And so one of our challenges was in supporting faculty. You know, we as a university worked hard to provide protection protocols for everybody. We worked to provide alternate teaching and learning modalities, clearly a lot of remote. We did, you know, what's called high flex. And so this idea that you could take your class on campus, you could do it remote. A professor could be on campus, a professor could be remote. You know, just whatever you wanted to do, you could do it for a semester, you could do it for a day. The opportunities would be there for you to pivot. And so even within all of that, we recognized that lab faculty were going to be the biggest challenge, because, you know, it's just hard for some of those things, especially in the, you know, the tactile labs where you've got to be hands-on to do remote. There's some clever things you could do, but by and large, that in-person experience was necessary. And so we wanted to provide them with as much support as we could. And one of the support mechanisms was just timely information related to possible exposures. You know, we wanted them to feel good, at least, that if we knew about an exposure of somebody that they may have been close to, or a positive case, that we could inform them quickly. And so that was the goal. And so to do that, we built PowerAutomate again to the rescue. So essentially, with crafting a query from our core student information system that helps us know, you know, who are all of our students, what courses and sections are they in. We're able to pull that out on a daily basis from our student information system, and then run a PowerAutomate that says, well, I should back up and say, whenever a case in our SharePoint case management system transitioned to positive, so PowerAutomate, I basically built a trigger that said, okay, whenever you see the status of one of these cases change, fire. And this PowerAutomate would come in, you can see, again, through a series of conditional logic to kind of roll through and make some decisions. And it would come back and say, okay, that status changed from something that wasn't a positive case to a positive case, and now go and take some action. And in this case, we wanted to know, all right, now we have perhaps this is a student, the student is now confirmed positive through a positive test result. We're going to go look at what courses the student's in, and the student is in a lab. And if that's the case, we're going to send an email out as a result of that. So here is the resulting email sent to appropriate parties, being the professor, copying the student, the dean of students, but just kind of the chain of custody. And you can see I've covered up the things you shouldn't see, but just this, you know, just kind of laying out that there's possible exposure. You know, you need to assess your risk that could have come from that, and you know, act appropriately. So the idea there is that this you know, maybe helps them feel better about protecting anybody that they may further be in contact with. And, they would know, okay, well, it was this person, but I do know that I was nowhere near them, or they were actually absent that day, or, whatever the case may be. But it's just that kind of knowledge is more power in this case. And so pivoting back to kind of our big ecosystem, I don't have any more screenshots of things to drill into, but I want to make a few other comments about this. There are several things that I didn't get into, and I'm just going to talk about kind of very briefly in this. I didn't dive into what we did about community testing. I didn't dive into gateway testing. I didn't dive into spring intentions or daily athletics. And so I'm going to my intent was just to briefly mention these. We do community testing. So at Bellarmine, our plan is we've engaged with a testing provider that is on campus 2 days a week. We don't force anybody in our community to get tested, but we wanted to ultimately remind everyone this testing is available, and we encourage you to be tested because it would help us know. We definitely found, I don't have hard numbers in front of me, but our asymptomatic testing was powerful. We were able to find through our community testing people that were asymptomatic and able to quickly isolate them from others on campus. And and who knows how much that could have cut down on potential spread from that initiative. But to do our community testing, we used bookings. So another product in the suite where we're able to decide how many appointments we think we can handle every 10 minutes, make those available, collect that, let our community members go get those appointments. We also have a entire SharePoint ecosystem, kind of a series of lists that contain all of our community members. Everybody in our community is assigned into one of 4 pools, pool A, B, C, or D. And then every week that, BU bot gets to work and it goes out and it invites, week 1, pool A is invited to come and test. Week 2, pool B. So it sends out, a lot of emails, over 1,000-ish emails, in every one of these cycles to invite people to come and test. Now, it may be that there's reasons that they don't want to test. They want to opt out of testing. There is a form where they can do the opt out. There is a form where they could say, oh, I've already had a previous test. And if they want to share a result, they're welcome to. And then that form feeds back in and would opt them out of future testing for whatever period of time. If it's because they'd had a previous positive and need to be out for 90 days or things like that. So SharePoint is managing that, in conjunction with bookings, which is really nice. And then for our athletes, we had a little bit more stringent requirements. We send out the daily form is available for anybody that's going to step on campus. And for our athletes, though, we require that they do a daily form. And so that infrastructure and that series of PowerAutomates is a little more rigorous because it will send out, say at 8 a.m. a reminder, you need to fill out your form. And then at 10 a.m. it'll go look at all of the people that filled out forms and say, okay, only 40% of our athletes filled out forms. So it will send an email to the 60% that didn't. And then 2 hours later, it will repeat the process. And it does it all day. And we, I see the arc happen all day, high non-compliance in the morning, and by late afternoon, everybody's sick of getting all the emails. So they've just gone in and filled the form out. But that's just an iterative process. And so it's a little different than what we do for the general campus. That's more of like a 1 email invitation. And then also we use this infrastructure to manage quarantine meal delivery. So early on, we had food service that was doing their thing, and there was maybe an email or a spreadsheet going or some text like, hey, I need you to deliver a meal to room X or what. And so now we collect, any specific food information that might impact meal delivery. That goes into the system, and then everybody gets emailed on a regular cadence over in food services of what needs to be delivered when and where, and any specifics are kind of communicated in there. And then lastly with that is also our quarantine space management. So we have about 25 units that we've used as our kind of quarantine locations. And as those things become available, then somebody's out of quarantine, maybe they've moved back to their original room, then notification gets sent to facilities and kind of cleaning services to make sure that those rooms get properly sanitized, and kind of all ties together. So that's really it. I do have a few things that I want to be honest about, and that is there are a few situations, to be brutally honest, that I didn't solve entirely with Microsoft 365 and the suite of tools. There's a couple of challenges around moving some of the data from on-premise logs to on-premise SQL that PowerAutomate is not great at. I did start exploring PowerAutomate desktop throughout this process, but time was the problem. So I kind of went with Jerry Blank's advice and, go with what you know. So I stuck with the things that I knew, which was kind of, reverting back to PowerShell. But I have in my mind, ways that I want to improve this and make this just all be entirely Microsoft 365. However, kind of in that, I also hope that the pandemic just ends and renders every bit of this completely useless, which was one part of the mindset that's like, at the end of the day, like the best day is going to be when I can just drop all this infrastructure because we just don't need it anymore. So, and I won't feel horrible about that. But, I feel good that we had tools that helped us, solve a lot of problems over the past year. I mean, honestly, if we weren't as mature in our practice with the Microsoft 365 ecosystem, I don't know how we would have managed remote education, for one, and I certainly don't know how we would have managed as much as we did with kind of pandemic management, very rapidly. So I'll throw this out there. I'm, always interested in thoughts and, good, bad. So if you have questions, you're welcome to email me at any time. And there's that link, just our AK server. You could go to Underground and see some of the, the tales from the quarantine. And so that concludes my remarks. I'll take a breath and turn it back over to you, Jeremy, or if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take a stab at them, or
yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to jump in. One question I had was, I think you said you have around 4,500 teams. I suspect the majority of those are class for classroom usage. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely correct. And we would, yeah, for sure. And we'll see, X chunk about 500 or 600 coming on board every semester, and so now we're going to be in that situation where we're going to have to start figuring out how do we want to retire some of these older ones. We've struggled through some of that, figuring out with our learning management system, what do you do with some of those old courses? I don't want a whole bunch of digital debris, but to me, from a student standpoint, like the feedback that we've gotten from students about having all their courses in Teams has been outstanding. The comments are, please don't do it in, 5 different ways. Like, I love that I can go into Teams and all my classes are there and it's all tight and together. And it's easy for me to kind of, manage my life that way. So I think it's pretty cool to be able to go back and look at Teams and sort of see your academic history. And if you want to jump back into something a couple years ago to get a resource or whatever, that it's there for you. So, we'll start to have to, I guess, deal with what's the long-term outcome of carrying a lot of teams. But I don't even know in the grander sense, Bellarmine's nowhere near as big as like an Arizona State. So if they were doing this, us at 4,500, would they be at, 60,000? I don't know how quickly they'd grow and how that would support. So
yeah, I know in our environment, I will say I feel a little bit lucky in that immediately when groups became a thing, we kicked on the expiration policy. And in talking with a lot of people, not just in higher ed, but even in business, it seems like they didn't do that initially and then struggle with how to try to get that turned on, because once people are used to things just sticking around, and the fear of just things potentially disappearing, although now that they have the activity-based renewal, I don't see a ton of teams actually expiring out. But so, and I was looking up your average enrollment, and compared to KCTCS, it's, you know, we have a whole lot more enrollment. So I compared our teams, and we're sitting at about the same amount as you. So you are infinitely ahead of us in where, you know, the number of teams and that adoption. Although I was really surprised to see so many people just gravitate to teams. I know we used it for meetings, and so that was kind of almost like a forced thing that you had to do, but to see the number of teams spun up for us, I was really surprised to see that number even.
Yeah, I still, you know, the marketing of it, I mean, that's why we always joke, we just call ourselves evangelists, although I totally, you know, took that from Microsoft's terming, but it's good because that's what we're doing, is we're out there trying to explain, like, there's an easier way. And I mean, probably oversharing, but literally this week, somebody fairly important at our university asks me if I've ever heard of Slack. And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, what do you think? And I was like, you've got it. Like, let's not do the same thing 5 ways, right? It's we don't need a bunch of tools to all try to, like, if you could do this right now. And if you would just start sending DMs, you'd change the world. You know, everybody would get on board with that. So there's a guy, his name's Joe Gasper, who's works at the University of Florida. And early on in the pandemic, I randomly found him in like some Microsoft Teams. It was actually a team. And he connected with me after I asked a question. And turns out, like, I followed his work, and he is kind of like the Teams evangelist for the University of Florida and kind of that whole system. And he talks about this, the way he tries to get people to use Teams starts with this whole thing about apologizing to them for all the different things that they've shown them in the past. And they should have just shown them this one thing, Teams, that's got all the other things in it. And I'm like, yeah, you know, he said that approach has worked for him, but I still, you know, people are like, well, okay, team, but I still need Box, right? No, you don't, but.
I see Matt, I think Matt has a question. Matt?
Yeah, real quick. You mentioned that your BU bot shared email does a lot of the heavy lifting for communications, but on the PowerAutomate side, do you have a service account running all the flows, or is that running under the same kind of
Yeah,
shared?
no, but that's kind of one of the huge limiters. Like, a lot of those flows they're me. So not even necessarily all shared flows. So that was it. I kind of get, like, I'm sort of that, you know, sinew in the middle of it, which isn't what I would recommend for, you know, enterprise systems. But yeah, that's why like using shared mailboxes was a big deal. So it gets it out of me. But
gotcha.
Yeah, I think that kind of discussion goes back to something you said that I think we all have to really go toward, which is you got to get out the minimum viable product and then hope to improve upon that. And
yeah,
especially,
well, I mean, it's you're sitting in the room, and it's like, I mean, you got people, you know, like, I'm coming into some of those meetings where I've got colleagues that they didn't get to sleep, you know, because they've spent all night like dealing with people that are really sick. And, you know, and then they're just in pain, or, you know, just being candid. We've had parents that don't appreciate some of the policies that the university's had. And we're not the team that's, you know, we're not making policy. We're just implementing these things. But yet we're the ones that are getting chewed out and yelled at. And I got people coming in crying, you know, and it's like, I'm like, give me 5 minutes and I can get you a report that's going to make your life better. You know, and if I can help you a little, and then you know how that goes, but you look back and it's like, oh my gosh, you know, now I've built this house and I wish I would have built it on the other street, but everybody lives here now. So yeah, it's tough.
Anybody else have any questions out there? Cool. Well, Eric, I definitely appreciate you offering to join us and kind of share your all story. It was good to hear. I think you said at the beginning at one point where you're just kind of making things up, and it's kind of good to hear that, because I think we all are doing that. Not just now, but really any more things change so much that we're kind of just flying by the seat of our pants and making things up. And it's really good to hear like other people are, at times you feel like you're alone in that. And you're like, we don't have our act together. We don't,
Man, yeah.
So
No, I hear you. You know, and the thing that I've been doing this for a while. I see a lot of other schools and a lot of other companies. I mean, the thing is, like, there's things that you're doing that you're great at, and you've got fantastic resources, and there's areas where you've got deficiencies because we all have them, but they're not always the same, right? And so you're solving problems with a mix of people, process, and technology always, and we're richer in different areas. Because if there was just one way to do it or one thing to do, it'd be easy, right? But instead, you've got challenges that are unique to you, even though some may be similar. You've got different capacities and capabilities, and so you got to align whatever. And I just want to, bring light to the fact that there's this amazing box of stuff from Microsoft that you could use to make the world better and make your world better. And I struggle with, why wouldn't you? There's some good stuff. So